Prayer is something that is spoken about by many in the Christian faith, but we as Christians are often flippant in how we address the topic. It is seen as just a ritual we do at meals or before large life events, but there is more to it than is often recognized by Christians, and because of this, it becomes less cared about by others. The phrase, "our thoughts and prayers are with the grieving," has become a universal statement to give the media, but so often rings hollow to our ears. This hollow feeling when we hear people saying they will pray for us comes because we've lost our true understanding of what prayer is, and because of that, we limit how it is supposed to be applied to life. There are cultural images such as people praying in hospital rooms, churches, at the kitchen table, before a family trip, and even a small child kneeling by their bed in the darkness as a candle flickers nearby is a classic image you might see on a greeting card. But prayer was meant to be more than just a image or something you do, more than just a vague box they put things into for what you do in the outside space when you're not at a church service or reading the Bible. Prayer is meant to be something more. It is people gathered together in the home of a person with unified spirits interceding on a concern that they are all sharing in. It is a teenager with a journal sitting in silence and listening for the response that shall be given to them. It is a mother with her hand on the shoulder of her sleeping child that they might see the way of the Lord and follow in its path. It is a husband and wife expressing the worries of life that are on their minds as they desire to provide and care for each other. And the final image I would give you is that of a concerned citizen who is begging on their knees for God to open the eyes of their leadership so that they can see what is right in the eyes of the Lord and choose what is just, so that the country can fall under the favor of God and thus thrive as He gives them His blessings on them. When you read through Paul's writings, you'll see that he is always talking about the importance of prayer and that the people should never stop praying. He does so in his first letter to the church in Thessalonica, he does so in his letter to the Ephesians, and we also see that Christ himself would go off to spend time with God, his Father, and that shows us what the true purpose of prayer is. That is fellowship with God, our Father in heaven, our Father who is Yahweh Elohim. The word Elohim comes from Hebrew, and it means the mighty one, sometimes translated as the mighty ones. When the writers are talking about the false gods of the pagans, it can sometimes be written as the gods or something along those lines. But when the Hebrews use it, specifically the Jews talk about their own God, they are referring to their own God, and they can use the same word Elohim as well, because it indicates a position of power and authority. Whereas the word, specifically the name Yahweh, which is the holiest of names they can assign God, it means I am. And it is how God revealed himself to Moses at the burning bush and on Mount Sinai. This element of the names of God that we so often miss carries a whole lot more power than we realize. Because when we realize that God is the I am, or the eternal one, and also the mighty one, when we put these two together, we realize he is the eternal mighty one who will never grow weary, who will never faint, he will never grow weak. But the thing is, in order to be effective in the spiritual realms, we have to understand who he is. When I wrote Welcome to the Armory, I researched the Greek words that Paul used to describe each virtue, and I found that faith, that word for faith, is peace. But in also other contexts, it can be used to mean the phrase hope. Faith is described by Hebrews chapter 11 as a confidence and assurance of what has not yet happened or what we do not yet see, which means hope, faith are also tied directly to trust. And that gives us an understanding of why it's so important to be in relationship with God. Because the more we know Him and the deeper, the more we're willing to trust Him. The more we're willing to trust Him, the more we're willing to submit to Him. And it's that submission to Him that gains us that power. And that is an element that we must not forget ever. Part of this reason why it's so important to know why we have or do not have power and why we must submit to Him and continue to gather to Him is because When spiritual forces, the principalities are mentioned in Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12, are operating in our current day and age, they operate not as they used to do with pagan ideologies and idols, temples, false gods, and the like. They operate today in other ways of influencing us, specifically ideologies and the people who put forth these ideologies. When we read in John chapter 14, verse 6, Jesus says, "I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." And also we see that Christ calling himself the way indicates he'll show us and guide us through things also. He continues on in John chapter 17 or 15 or 16. It's a part of the long sermon, his final lecture, if you want to say it that way, from John chapter 13 all the way to John chapter 17. But Jesus says that I will give you the Spirit of truth who will guide you in all truth. This is important because in our current day and age, the demons will use ideologies to gain influence and control of the people in the same way that they use the false gods to control people. When Paul was in Ephesus, he experienced a resistance from the principalities of that area, specifically the cult of Diana. In Ephesus, Diana, one of the Roman goddesses, if I remember my mythology classes and the Percy Jackson books, Diana was the goddess of the hunt and other things, can't remember it all, but she was a prominent figure in the city of Ephesus. And there was a silversmith who was making money from selling the idols to the pilgrims and the passerbys who wanted to have this idol to their god in their house or with them so that they could pray to the god during their travels in life. Other silversmiths also made money by selling of these idols. Because Christianity was growing and people were abandoning worship of Diana, the silversmiths grew mad and caused a riot in favor and try and support Diana. It's only because of God telling Paul to not be afraid to stay in the city because he had many supporters that Paul stayed, and the whole riot thing was taken care of because the leader of Ephesus at the time said, "Are you crazy? If word got out about this to the Romans, they'd send in the whole legion because we were rioting and we have a bunch of other problems. So don't do this again unless we want worse problems." And so God took care of them. But this brings up the point that I want to make. It's that the spiritual forces in control, once they institutionalize themselves, be it through a false worship, through a false god, or through a prevailing ideology in our current day and age, that we have to maintain prayer and understand that they will resist us, but we must continue to pray because of the strength God has given us. We as Christians have the authority to tear down the strongholds, to break them down and to cast out demons. That can only be done if we have prayer and fasting. The disciples learned this the first hand when they had saved a boy who suffered from a demon. This account of the demon is recorded in Matthew chapter 17, verses 14 through 21, and it reads as thus: "And they had come to the multitude, a man came to him, kneeling down to him and saying, Lord, have mercy on my son, for he is an epileptic and suffers severely, for he often falls into the fire and often into the water. So they brought him to your disciples, but they could not cure him. Then Jesus answered and said, O faithless and perverse generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I bear with you? Bring him here to me." And Jesus rebuked the demon, and it came out of him. And the child was cured from that very hour. Then the disciples came to Jesus privately and said, Why could we not cast it out? So Jesus said to them, Because of your unbelief. For assuredly I say to you, if you have faith as this mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, Move from here to there, and it will move, and nothing will be impossible for you. However, this kind does not go out except by prayer and fast. Matthew chapter 17, verses 14 through 21, New King James Version. The early church had its power and was able to grow quickly with signs and wonders for one specific purpose, and that is because they were operating in the Holy Spirit's empowerment. They only got that empowerment as a result of them making sure to spend regular time in unity of spirit, in prayer and fasting, and to getting His guidance. In the same way, we must also be in that same unity of spirit to effect changes. To gain the strength we need, we must be in dedication to God, and we cannot let ourselves become isolated from Him. Solomon spoke about this element, if not this element, but others in life, in the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 4, verse 12, by saying, "The one may be overpowered by another, two can withstand him, and the threefold cord is not quickly broken." The effectiveness of our prayer is done by recognizing what is going on, researching the events, seeing the biblical perspective on it, and then through unified prayer, through fervent and continuous prayer, praying for the eyes to be open so that we see what is going on, so that we can understand the scriptures, so we can understand life, and so that those in positions of authority will be put in accordance to God's will by having their own eyes open. In his Sermon on the Mount, Jesus said it's important for us to pray for our enemies and those who persecute us because of two things. One, prayer brings us in accordance to God so we can see the people as God sees them, as individuals who are most likely going down the wrong way, who may not know God, who are blind and can't understand that they are doing wrong. Thus we need to pray for them to have their eyes open so they can see right, turn to God, gain repentance, be saved from hell, and do what is right. But then the other purpose is because it changes our own hearts to also be more in tune with Him. We can disagree about what our leaders are doing, and there is no condemnation in disagreeing with them. We're just told to pray for them to do things in accordance with God. The way I see things is very similar to anger, in that God says we can be angry, but we're not to sin. We can be upset, but we're not supposed to do evil. And we can disagree without going and doing what is wrong in the eyes of God. And that's why we must understand the importance of learning how to express ourselves in effective ways. When we are to be in prayer time with God, we can be very open with Him about what we are dealing with. Some of us may use strong words, and we can be better at how we use our words. But the important part is making sure that God is with us so that we can learn how to temper ourselves in accordance with His ways to see things how He is seeing things and thus become better. I ask and pray for as you continue to go through life, whatever the outcomes of an election or what your leadership may do, because not all of us have the ability to vote for our leaders, but to keep praying for them to be brought into the light of God and what is right to be done. And that is something I must ask for you to do for me as well, because I'm human just like you. I struggle with this. You will struggle. We are humans. We all have struggles. But so long as we continue to make an effort to become better, to come in closer contact with God, He will improve ourselves as well. Until next time, courage and Godspeed. Continue to pray, for it's the best thing we can do.